This is Justice Worriers, a podcast where we think about things that are right and wrong in our world and how Christian ideas can help us respond to them. We prefer hard questions over easy answers, and we'd love you to join us in our ramblings. Listen in and contact us using the links in the show notes.
Hello and welcome to Justice Worriers. This is like a special episode, so I don't know what number it is. I'm here with my friend Dave. Say hello, Dave. I caught you while you're drinking.
Hello.
So Dave is someone that I know from my youth and from the present, and we're gonna talk a little bit about like our experience of being, especially I guess of being young Christian, and in particular. What we learned about sex and sexuality and stuff from that time. So first of all, Dave, can you tell us a bit about? So you sort of met Christians slightly later in life than I did. So how old were you? What happened?
Ish. I mean, everybody's story is interesting, isn't it? And slightly different. But home life was, I'd say, my parents were pro-Christianity growing up, but my mum would go to church every week, but that was kind of what you did. I would have said that her attending church didn't necessarily alter her way of living in the way that you would say a Christian sort of should really have that influence. Although you could argue it did, so who knows? So, but. We and I was encouraged to attend church, but not asked to. My dad went on Easter and Christmas, and therefore everybody else did on Easter and Christmas, regardless. I had one brother who seemed to be a Christian from the year dot. No one knows quite why. And then my other brothers and my sister all kind of went to church, but I would largely say they kind of didn't really, they all sort of faded away from church as they got older. Subsequent to that, one of my brothers has come back to his faith during that, after leaving home, if you like. And then, now my view is, goodness knows, I don't know what is a Christian, what isn't a Christian, who knows anymore.
It sounds like some interesting things have happened, so we'll maybe get to some of that. So my experience was very much, I wasn't forced into being at church, and I went to church very much with an open mind of what on earth are they doing here, and often found it very odd. Why would I do it? And why did I do it? Ironically, the main reason for attending church, definitely as I got older, was definitely girls, without a doubt, about 100%. There's no doubt. So I think that's clear. Having said that, there was something that linked me to church that sort of was interesting. Just the thought of something beyond what we could see. I think that subject is intrinsically interesting to everybody, and if it's not, then I would be very surprised if they didn't have a view on it. Just there's something about it that's just is interesting. It sort of sparks that sort of what if question. So anyway, there you go. So you had a kind of very low pressure.
Very low.
Introduction to Christianity, but then you got involved in a what I call an evangelical. Was it just the youth group?
Yeah, mainly the youth group. Although we did go along to, I did go along to at the time my girlfriend's evangelical church, which was bonkers. Properly. I mean, I don't mind. It really was.
So was it sort of charismatic? yes and yes. Everything that is like sort of like those words which you just sort of start associating. One of those churches, yes. They were one of those churches.
People speaking in tongues.
Oh yeah,
people having
prophecies. Everything, the whole works, even to the point where they were predicting the end times. And I seem to remember they even did they have a date? I can't remember. It was bonkers stuff, and I remember going, really not into this, to the point where I went up at one time. I mean, this is a bit of a side to the whole sex thing, but we went up to the I went up to the front, partly because I was interested in going up to the front, because everybody went up to the front. It was kind of like expected. I was a little bit like, all right then. Yeah, all right, I suppose I can put myself in the category. And this guy put his hand on my head because everybody was falling over. But I didn't want to fall over. Yeah. And I had this really weird moment where this guy was pushing on my head to the point where it was like embarrassing pushing on my head. And I was like, do I just take his hand off and sort of make a bit of a scene and say, I'm really sorry, not feeling it, go home? The trouble is when you're 16 and you've got, your girlfriend with their parents in the audience, if you like, or the congregation, whatever you want to call it. I suppose for me it's more of an audience, but anyway, the congregation, do you do such a bold maneuver? Because that's basically an end game kind of scenario, really. So I just went for all right, then I'll just fall on the floor. Right. And then some bloke came up and prayed for me as if I was sort of like, and I was like, and I was like, okay, thank you. And then he sort of followed me up afterwards, and I was like, oh my goodness. He's like, I really wanted to, and I was like, I really didn't want anybody to talk to me at all. I was like, no, thank you. I didn't ask for it, didn't want it particularly.
You're not the only person I know who has felt that someone has tried to push them over in a situation like that.
It's just unbelievable. So, yeah, what that taught me was basically most of that is just rubbish.
Okay, so you're in a, like... you went to that
particular church.
That church. You also were in a youth group that was a bit less extreme than that.
Yes.
And then what I want to ask you is, how much did you buy into the worldview of that?
Well, you see, I don't think I deliberately bought into it, but I also think that there was an element of culture around things that I just consumed.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
And I had, you didn't realise you had consumed it, but you probably had. And certainly...
Yeah, to me it was just, this is what a Christian is.
Yeah.
And those other people that go to other churches, they're just the Sunday Christians, or, they're not, and we're the actual Christians.
Yeah, something along those lines, although there was, they were never said, definitely never said. And if ever it was very much, oh, no, don't believe all that sort of thing. But there was kind of like this moment where, but you do.
Yeah, I just totally did.
And then I think when I look at it as okay, so what was I consuming? And I think so I've been thinking a little bit before this recording thing. I'm obviously not really, not like trying to write some sort of sermon or anything like that, but more just thinking, oh crikey, what am I actually going to say when someone asks me about what is all this going on? And where it boils down to is, and I don't know what the right title is, so I haven't kind of got it yet, but in terms of relationships, certainly the church did not equip me to build up healthy relationships that were grounded in a way that you can rely upon, in a way that is open and honest and intimate. And that's the word that sort of kept cropping up in my head. An intimate relationship. Because you would say, in my view, your relationship with God should be the most intimate relationship ever. I mean, I'm thinking now rather than what people preached to me then. So I'm thinking now that should be the case. Therefore, if God has an incredibly intimate relationship with you, surely he wants you to have incredibly intimate relationships with many of his other family members, which is everybody else. So I'm like going, there's this element of intimacy that we just don't have, particularly in the UK, where we're told basically tell everyone else to naff off. And, unless they are your wife, then you've got to naff off. And if they're your wife, then you can have an intimate relationship. But no one ever really says, what does that mean? No one explains in any shape or form, or even today. I mean, I struggle to remember any sermon that has any form of intimacy. And that's the word that keeps coming up in my head of not just saying, oh, yes, you should have, a close relationship or a loving relationship. And the man is, oh my goodness, has got these roles, and the woman has got these roles, and my goodness, how much have they messed me up? And I'm like going, where all this, just throw all those in the bin and just say, okay, how can you be more intimate? How can you be closer to that person? And, I just get this, today I get it wrong all the time. I'm so bad at it. But I feel like if I go back to my, days of being younger, they taught you rules of how almost actively not to do that, and to actually say, almost like emotions and all that sort of stuff, they're basically sinful. And if you go down that route, well, basically that's wrong and bad. And then normally, if there was any preaching on sex or girls of any description in any way of relating to them, I would put money on the fact that people would say at some point about if you were taking things too far in a sexual relationship, it would either do something where it was like sort of, so bad that you were disrupting that girl's life forever, because you would have the number of images about girls, and obviously I don't really know how it feels like, but they compared them to flowers, which you then take off the heads of the flower. That was one of them. That was brilliant. Another one was, I forget, but there are lots of really incredibly
dirtying.
Yeah, and like, you've done something horrific because you've gone too far with that girl. And I'm like going, crikey, that's really serious stuff. And then there would be even worse than that. If you thought you could get worse, you'd have grieving the Holy Spirit, which was like, what the hell does that mean? But, oh my goodness. So basically, emotions bad, take them away, throw away any intimacy. We don't want any of that. And for me, that's where I was sort of almost, the unwritten rule was, that stuff is basically sinful, bad. Stay away from it. And obviously, in a loving marriage, it's all healthy and fine. And I'm like, how the hell do you get from there to there? No one tells you how to get from there to there. And then suddenly it's like you get married and by magic, it's now all beautiful and everything's fine. I'm like going, that process can only ever, now as an adult, I'm like going, no wonder, I'm sure, I don't know what the stats are, I haven't looked them up, but, I know there's an awful lot of people who get married and get divorced. And I'm like going, I'm sure part of that reason is we set people up to fail based on the idea that we don't give them any real tools, except for maybe 6 sessions before you get married.
So before we go right into all the sexuality stuff, I'm interested in what, you've talked a little bit about what was kind of said, what was talked about in that evangelical world. So what do you think was important? What was a good Christian like? What was important in that world for you? What was the relationship with God like? You talked about it kind of not being intimate.
I guess simplicity, the bit that I picked up, I'm not saying it was explicitly taught, but basically, there are broadly good people and bad people, and if you're in a good people zone, then, you listen to God and you do it in this fashion. And interestingly now, obviously I look at it and go, man, it's just all kinds of wrong. But I also see it as there's an element of it was meant in an entirely good way. Mm-hmm. So one part of me goes, God, that's bonkers. And another part of me goes, I can see why they said that, and I can see why they were doing that, and I can see why they were allowing that to be, in many ways, quite a toxic way of thinking, because it was it was rooted and embedded in what they were thinking, and it was part of their culture, and that's what came out.
Yeah, so I think that fits quite well with my picture, right? So there's this hierarchy of wisdom, right? So there's God at the top who knows what's best for you, and the ideal thing that would happen in your life is you would do exactly what's best for you at every moment.
Yes.
And there's these adults who have your best interests at heart.
Yeah.
And they're teaching you, out of love, how to exactly walk in the footsteps laid out for you on the path that are the right decisions. And I feel like that was a pattern across everything, and it really fits with this conversation about sexuality.
Yes, and I can see that, and that also relates to a lot of how I naturally approach the Bible, and how I now almost actively go so far against that way of thinking. It's almost problematic the other way. But so just to be clear, I can't pitch you where I said, this is where the sermon was that said this. But what I can tell you is that I felt like if I read the Bible and I understood it perfectly, I would be able to be the perfect Christian, and I could choose that path. And it was as simple as sort of saying, as soon as I understood it, I could then apply it if I wanted to and do it. But I needed to know it in order to do it. And it was just like, basically it was the Bible and that's it. And now I go, I just don't subscribe to that. I see it as a sequence of relationships that encountered God, and just a few moments recorded to allow us to see into that person's life in a particular time, in a particular way, to allow us to see a little glimpse of their relationship.
Those who died are justified for wearing the badge. They're the chosen whites, the justified. Those that died, they're the chosen whites.
So, did this ever happen to you? Well, this happened to me. I was invited to the youth leader and his wife's house.
Yeah. I think I was there.
With my girlfriend. For the conversation about sex. I guess it was the conversation about sex. How that went for me was, I don't remember anything. Maybe there was loads of other helpful, useful stuff to talk about.
we had a bit of this.
But what I remember was, it was a conversation about what you shouldn't do sexually.
What's interesting, sorry, I got to interrupt because I knew you had this conversation because they cherry-picked people for the sex conversation who were not necessarily on the straight and narrow. And I remember thinking like, "Ooh, they've gone for the sex talk." I remember thinking, "Am I bold enough to ask them if they had sex?" Because that would be just like, you can't ask somebody that. That's would be, oh my goodness. Anyway,
so so that was. I don't know what else we talked about, but they definitely talked about essentially you shouldn't be having sex. Oh, and also you shouldn't be doing this, that, and the other thing. And I remember that wasn't the only occasion. So I went to a completely different youth group where we definitely had a talk to everyone about that. We also watched some videos on a weekend away, some Steve Chalk videos.
Steve Chalk.
But the thing that I want to bring up, because it makes my point the best, is the story of the driver, the person who's going to employ a driver. Right,
around the mountain.
Let me tell the story. So there's a little old lady who's looking for a chauffeur to drive her to her very dangerous house on top of a mountain with a winding mountain road.
She really should have moved.
And so she gets a few drivers in and says to them, "How close can you drive to the edge of the road to get me down, and still get me safely down the mountain?" And then she has a few drivers and they drive close to the road, blah, 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 blah. And then one driver comes along and drives miles away from the edge. And then she employs that driver because that's the driver that, didn't risk her life. So here's what's wrong with that story. Apart from it's a stupid story, here's what's wrong with that story. The elephant in the room in that story is if you make a mistake, you die.
I never thought of that.
And that, to me, that is a picture of how sexual sin was represented to me. It fits with your thing about the flower. The flower, you can't put petals back on the flower.
Exactly.
If you fall off a cliff, you're dead.
Yeah.
If you dare to vary slightly from this path that's laid out for you, all is lost. You may as well not have been born, or you may as well not have a sexuality.
The point is, you make a mistake, you do something irreparable, and it's the end. You grieve the Holy Spirit, for crying out loud. It's like, I still don't even know what that phrase means. But anyway, the point is that it was used in that context to sort of scare you. And there's an element of I get the good-heartedness of people saying, this is important stuff. And I really get, and I don't want to belittle it because, obviously I've got kids and I don't want them, to have a situation whereby, if they had sexual encounters too early, we all know that can be really quite harmful in its own right. What I don't think you need to do is involve somebody saying you're now damned forever to try and sort of ram home that. I think you can be a little more honest and open and say, well, look, if you do have children a bit too early, that's probably not going to be very helpful for any future learning career that you want to do, or whether you want to, because your life will now be around trying to look after this new little person in the world, and that will become more of your calling. And I think you can explain that in probably a much better way, but just a helpful and open and honest way, rather than, oh, you might be going to hell for it. That's just insane.
Yeah, you might kind of ruin your life. Because the other thing that was held out for us was, if you don't make any mistakes, and you get married because you're heterosexual,
you get to see the old lady. No.
And you fit into this mould that we've built for you, then you're going to have a fantastic sex life.
Oh, absolutely, yes. That was it. That was the promise. That's right.
But only if you don't mess it up. And all the people around you who are claiming to have a fantastic sex life right now are lying.
So,
I mean, probably when we were young, they probably were lying.
I'm sure. Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm not going to comment on other people's sex life because that's just bonkers. But I will say that was the definite. The definite prize was definitely, you save yourself for this, the right person, and then magic happens, and it's everything bonkers brilliant.
Okay, so do you have critiques of this worldview now, and what are they? I mean, you've mentioned some already.
Yeah, just too many. But I think so where I think what we don't do is we don't do this intimacy that I kind of crave, but at the same time, I've now sort of grown up so much seeped into where I'm too scared to read. I mean, I don't bring it up in topics of conversation, and it definitely doesn't happen. But I think my challenge to myself and to anybody else, is kind of like this relationship that we have with God, is incredibly intimate. And what do I do to encourage a more intimate relationship with other people? And frankly, I struggle with this. And where I think, church has the opportunity is to encourage this sort of thing, but we don't. We encourage a very standoffish with lots of socially built-in sets of rules that you can jump over this hurdle, and get to know this person a bit better if you've had coffee with them, if you've, taken time out, if you've had a walk with them, if you've done, there's just like oodles of hurdles that you get over. And then eventually, after God knows how long, you might be allowed to talk about things that are, open and dangerous, and things that might, just lead to, sort of heretical comments almost, and you kind of think, but actually those are the places where, if you like, that's where the freedom and the love of good relationships comes in, where you're allowed to be completely wrong, And it's okay. It's okay to be completely bonkers. And, someone can let off steam and shout and wail and bawl and kind of like, people don't mean it. But how often have you seen people just getting it really wrong in church? Everyone's always got it right and together. And it's just, and you so know it's not true. It's just
isn't that
fake.
Weird?
It's just fake.
Isn't it weird that the core message of our faith is you can be forgiven,
but then pretend everything's okay for the rest of the time when you're at church.
Yeah.
As long as you pretend while you're here, that's fine. Yeah. And then as soon as you go away,
as what you're being forgiven
apart.
is in the past, right?
Yeah.
We don't live in this,
that's right.
this daily forgiveness.
So your old life, that's another phrase, your old life.
Yeah.
It's like, no, sorry, my old life is still me. I still have that part. That's kind of my makeup is my old life. Thank you very much. But now I have this new life. And it's like, yes. The whole metaphor of you are now saved, which kind of implies you were struggling and you were swimming around and, oh no, I'm drowning, and now I'm saved. Everything's fine now. It's like, no. All those things that I struggle with, funnily enough, I still struggle now. So now I'm being saved every day. Okay. That almost sounds, I don't know. It doesn't work brilliantly well for me.
If being saved means like being pulled out of the water, that kind of is being saved every day. It kind of feels
how often have you been used the lifeboat scenario with, how to sort of bring people to faith? We are a lifeboat, we're bringing them in. And I'm like going, well,
still in the water.
I probably, I don't know, I just feel like constant state of resuscitation,
So this is interesting. This is making me think about, we never had the, what do they call those rings that you put on to say you're not going to have sex?
Oh, yeah, I remember those.
So we never had that.
No.
But they have that idea of a born again.
I did go to a place where they were wearing them.
Right.
So,
okay. They have this idea of a born again virgin. Right. So what's so ironic about that is, essentially, that is saying you can be forgiven, you can be rescued from falling off the cliff, but you're a virgin, as in you're back on the cliff, and one false step, you fall off again.
Great, I can die
and you're dead.
a million deaths,
and there's no coming back. The implication is there's no coming back from the second chance.
Yeah,
you didn't know before, and now you're.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about some consequences of this worldview, and then I want to talk about. So just to prepare you, I want to talk about. What's an alternative worldview? What do you want to teach your kids about sexuality? It's quite hard.
I know, that's tough.
So, some consequences. So,
just to say, we haven't prepared any of this.
No.
This is entirely us just speaking off the cuff.
Well, it came out of us having pretty much this conversation
a few weeks back.
Like standing outside a car, waiting to go home. So some bad consequences from this worldview. So one thing I want to put out there is there's a shocking number of Christian men, possibly Christian women, but what I know of, there's a shocking number of Christian men who have pornography addictions, which I put down to this kind of prohibition mindset that it's the falling off the cliff thing, right? So you're told that anything you do wrong will destroy you. Then you see some pornography or something like that, and you fall off the cliff, and then you're in like a shame well.
Oh yeah.
There's no climbing out, and from then on, it doesn't matter what you do next because you're unforgivable already.
Yeah.
And that shame is the cycle that causes most addictions, especially pornography addiction. It's the sense that you're unforgivable. So actually, that guardrail that was put in place out of love by the authoritarians saying, don't do this because it's bad, it's exactly the thing that traps you in the water.
Yeah. And it's that thing where, okay, so I can't remember everything you asked me, what the questions were.
I didn't ask you a question.
But I will say, if I'm trying to teach my kids a little bit, or at least rather than this is what I'm going to teach them, I want to try and keep this in my head that effectively, I think first and foremost, maintaining a relationship with my kids is the most important thing. So regardless of what happens, that's more important.
Right.
And for me, I see that in my relationship with God, i.e., I still have a relationship with God now, despite the fact that I've done oodles wrong, probably fallen off the cliff many times, and that poor old lady's never made it to the top. and there's a lot of dead roses at the bottom. But anyway, we won't worry about this. But we are there, and I'm saying that the relationship with them needs to be there. So just, whatever happens, it's having that relationship is the not having it, i.e., cutting myself off from that relationship because they have done sinful things, and saying, I can't talk to you until you've rectified yourself, or, you've done something crazy. Anyway, the point is maintaining yourself in that relationship is the important thing.
And just as someone with slightly older kids, I think the thing that's in my mind there is, I know it won't be me saying you can't come back because you've done this thing, but they could easily be saying that in their head. This is too bad for me to talk to my parents about. That is a really real worry for me. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, because that's the place where they start going into different places to ask for the answers to their questions, and inevitably they're going to go and ask somebody that is, should we say, probably not looking after their best interests as much as well as I hope that we are. The relationship thing. So yes, so making sure that they understand that it's whatever they do has as a decision has a consequence. Well, consequence makes it sound negative. It has a result, and that result will lead to something else. That will lead to something else. So and I think that is the if you practice your keyboard, then you'll get better. You might not become the best player in the world, but if you don't practice, then you can never get better than you currently are. And it's the same thing. Every decision that you make will have a result to it. What results do they want from these things? And you can where I hope will happen is we'll be able to explain very naturally there are certain results that will happen, some good, some bad, and sometimes without them learning for themselves, and sadly, because they're my kids, I've got a funny feeling they're going to try and learn through experience rather than through somebody else being able to give them that experience. Then, I'm pretty confident there's going to be some tough times ahead. But equally, I think there's the next step of saying, okay, right, you made a poor decision, and it could apply to anything. I mean, for crying out loud, I've made so many. But this is the key bit for me is actually the best learning times are through poor decisions. And then how do you rectify them? How do you go about changing your viewpoint? How do you go about, that bit? You now know, you've got the evidence, you've got the understanding. What do you do with that? And it's like trying to encourage that thing where now you know. How do I encourage you? Yes, I'm still here. Yes, I'm still rooting for you. And yes, there's still opportunities to make, beautiful and wonderful decisions from this point, even though you may feel like this has not gone well. And, it's about picking yourself up and seeing that it's not, it could have gone differently, but if you worry about that, you can worry about it forever, but, taking it further and what's the next step? I'd love them to feel like I could be part of their community of people that they call on to help them understand how to sort of understand the decision that they made, understand the result, and then try and influence the next one.
And now you do what they tell you. And now you do what they told you. And now
I was really struck while you were talking how far that is from where I am. So if I look back,
You do that to me all the time. It's amazing.
Which I do an unhealthy amount. I look back on mistakes in my youth, and I was just thinking how amazing it would be to think, yes, that's integrated into who I am now. I've learned from that. And it's in some sense, it's good, that I've done the learning, not that I've made the mistake. And that is so far from what I do. What I do is just churn over how I messed everything up by making that mistake. And if we could pass on something more healthy than that, wouldn't that be amazing?
It would be an awful lot better. And it comes from, something you said earlier that I going, yes. It's that shame-based society.
Yeah.
And I don't know where I picked it up from, but certainly, there is a way of acting and a way of being. There's a normal. You have to be normal. And I am so far from being normal.
You are.
That I struggle with this on such a fundamental scale. I've always, in some ways, I've craved to be normal in some parts of my life. And now I'm very glad I'm not. But it wasn't because of design.
Talk about being normal could get us onto a subject which I think we probably need to leave for another day, which is gender and sexuality and the kind of...
I'm glad we're going to leave that.
Yeah, so that's something that I think on Justice Warriors we want to talk about. We're probably not going to talk about this evening. So I want to bring you back to... you talked about, when you were thinking about your kids, the key thing for you was preserving your relationship with them, no matter what mistakes they make, or hopefully what mistakes you make.
I think that's probably more appropriate.
So I want to ask you how that translates into a relationship with God and contrast it with the falling off the cliff thing. Is there something there? Like, do we want to teach our kids that God will love them whatever they do? And how do we teach them that because we were told that loads.
Yeah.
And I don't believe it for a second. I think God hates me.
Yeah. And there's also this hierarchical relationship with God. No.
So what are you going to teach your kids?
I just...
Or what do you want? What do you aspire to? I'm not saying you're going to succeed.
I want them to know that there are clearly ways to encourage a relationship with God. Yeah. So if you want to pray, whatever praying means, if you want to just take time and just let your mind rest and find a place. And if you want to, sort of ask questions, it's not about, it's about trying to find that peace, that stillness, that moment where you can just truly relax. So what am I trying to encourage my kids to do? I want them to get them to be in a place where they can listen to themselves, and they can recognize that there is lots of voices, not just their own. And what am I trying to do? I'm trying to teach them that there is more to this world than just themselves or their friends or me. Or, there is so much more. We're not really cutting the surface. I think there's intellectual stuff that we can teach them and get them to learn things. That's understood. I think well understood. I think there's an emotional intelligence that, frankly, I think I am really low down on and don't get, and really could do with more help on. And perhaps that's where I hope that they will develop further than me. And then I think there's also a spiritual intelligence that I think, I am learning now.
In particular, what are you going to teach your kids about sex? Are you going to teach them anything? Well, let's not say sex. Let's say relationships.
I think, it's that, I don't know. It's almost impossible. I mean, relationships are going to be tricky. I mean, bearing in mind they're my kids, so I'm afraid they're going to have some difficulties. And I think they're going to find it hard to allow people in an intimate relationship sensibly, because there's this thing for me. I won't go into too much detail, but I would say, yes, you can be intimate, but then you can be overly intimate. And I think we all know what a relationship feels like when it's too much. Equally, we all know what it feels like when they're too cold. So I think there is obviously some happy medium that is normal. And I think that normality will depend on the two people involved. And finding that normality, finding that wavelength is the sort of, and that wavelength will change over time. I think that's, it's that thing where you sort of say, well, yeah, relationships not only are difficult, they're constantly changing, as we all are. And speaking of, it's that element of trying to say, look, it's not about getting it right. It's about living it and being it and feeling it for all its good and all its bad. And it might end up being that you decide you don't want to continue that relationship. And that's one thing. And it might decide that you want to continue that relationship and you actually want to deepen it. And I think where I want to try and sort of hopefully encourage them, and I mean, without trying to sort of, make this a bit weird, but, to allow them some more tools than I did to explore how to gain some healthy intimacy. And I think that's where I'd be trying to sort of, and the way to gain healthy intimacy is through open conversations and healthy relationships with others that you've got already. So you're almost mimicking what you already have. You
understand yourself.
But goodness knows, because I haven't really got it yet. So I mean,
So I was reminded by what you were saying, and I've thought of it a couple of times this evening, of a story from someone on the Nomad podcast when they were talking about sexuality, and they were describing how them and their girlfriend were growing more intimate over time, and that included sort of sexual intimacy, and that was kind of a healthy, normal part of a relationship, and that it was kind of completely forbidden by the kind of purity framework that they were in. And that really blew my mind. I know it sort of sounds obvious probably, but I was like, yes, that was healthy.
Yeah.
And it was forbidden in this framework.
Yeah.
And I don't
certainly
know
was
how
forbidden
to
in our
process.
growing up.
Yeah.
Certainly. I mean, let me put it another way. Let me say the relationships that I remember that, if there were relationships that spun off and they got too sexual, too intimate, well, no one knew, they disappeared off. They couldn't be part of the group anymore.
Yeah.
So and I don't know whether or not the adults of the group, if you like, were the ones talking to them saying, sorry, you can't attend, or whether they just naturally felt they just couldn't maintain coming because it was too much of a facade of coming along and sort of agreeing to that.
Yeah, I feel like, so all I know is, like, I wouldn't want to try and give an opinion about what the right pattern for a relationship is. And I think your thing about normal being a silly idea is helpful here. But I just know that the idea that there's nothing and then there's a mature and fruitful sexual relationship in marriage is ridiculous, right? So if you want couples to not touch each other until they're married, you have to prepare them for that by saying, then you're going to need to spend a few years figuring out how this stuff works. And be gradual about it. I mean, no one said anything like that to me.
No, yeah.
So anyway, so that was my one thought, and then the other thought I had was, the other thing that I want to teach my kids is I want to just do the opposite of the cliff, right? So my experience of my life is wandering around in this like field.
At least you're in a field, not a desert. That's good. Well, it's a good start.
Yeah. So, but the point of the field is it doesn't have an edge in the sense that God's love, and it says this very clearly in the Bible, but I clearly didn't take it in. God's love follows me around that field. It goes on forever. There's nowhere that's too far that God doesn't love me anymore. And that's what's missing from my worldview about everything, and especially about sex. God's just with me and loves me. It doesn't change the amount God loves me when I make mistakes. Lots of other things change, but that thing doesn't change. And like we were talking before we recorded about how annoying Paul is, but Paul makes it very clear that is the picture he is trying to give of the width and breadth of and depth of God's love, right? That you can't escape from it. It's exactly the same thing I'm saying. So this is a biblical thing I'm saying.
But not really.
That's not what I was taught.
No. All those passages were twisted the other way, and I think, poor old NIV. I mean, I remember, someone calling it the nearly infallible version, and I that stuck because it's so not true. It's so of its time. Which is, the point being is that I wholeheartedly agree with what you were saying. Part of me goes, but it doesn't apply to me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm desperate to teach it to my kids. I'm well past believing that. I'll never believe it.
And then I think there's, granted, we skirted around a lot of sex stuff. One of the things, a really specific point. Have you ever heard a sermon on, or I don't know, something that's led towards when sex goes wrong in marriage? Have you, is there an assumption that once you get married as a Christian, sex is then instantly good and forever brilliant? And I'm like going, I'm not suggesting for a minute, one size fits all, but I'm suggesting that surely there should be, a tolerance of things don't always quite go according to plan. Oh man, we have lost the field of love, if you know what I mean.
Field of love.
That is what we have lost, and we're like we've given a whole bunch of rules and stuff that just really don't necessarily help. But I just want, I don't know. I'm desperate for my kids to know that they're loved and to know that they can have relationships, and they're going to be tricky, but they might be brilliant. And then because I can't imagine, maybe they are going to be one of those couples that meet when they're both 5 and they have the same relationship forever and they get married and have beautiful kids and everything's wonderful. Okay, I don't know too many of them. But, when they encounter difficulties, just want them to know that that's okay. It's not about being bad. It's not, there might not be any bad there. It's just you are now encountering relationship, and relationship will have complexity and weirdness and strangeness and things you don't understand and you don't comprehend, and learning and joy and horrible moments of that is relationship. It is, and I think that should be more church, as in there should be an element of this is horrible and hard, and it should be part of church. It should be part of that, but it shouldn't just be part of that. It should also have that joy to it. It should have that openness and that honesty, but there should be a healthy intimacy where we encourage wrong behaviour. We encourage realness. Why would you try and sort of say gloss over all those amazing things that people do in order to be themselves? Because we want them to, continue this facade that they must act in this way, to be like this in order to get this prize at the end or whatever it is. I don't know, I just feel like there's so much opportunity and brilliance, and yet we sort of almost say no, you must behave in this way, you must behave in that way, and you must do sex in this sort of crazy, don't do it, then you do it, but you'll be great and you'll be perfect at it with the perfect individual that, let's face it, none of us are perfect, so it's always going to be tough. All relationships are going to be a challenge in different ways. And I don't know. Those books that I read where somebody has said, yeah, we've never had an argument in our lives. And I'm like, well, I'm definitely not in that category. But, you know, you kind of like go, why am I even reading a book that's got that as part of it? You know, is that really the healthy way you want to be? You know, I don't know. So what am I going to teach my kids? I'm not going to teach them anything really. I'm probably going to teach them more bad things by just osmosis of what I do now. But yeah, I think it's maintaining that relationship, and then, you know, encouraging that whatever decision has been made, that doesn't necessarily mean that future decisions have to be bad. You are always making decisions, and those decisions now, you know, we have a chance to change now, and the next one, and the next one.
There's no cliff.
Yeah, and you are in that field, and you might well find yourself moving around in an aimless way or in a straight direction. Who knows? But you're always in that field. It does not matter which way you go. Yeah. But those decisions, you know, what is a good and bad decision? I think you can argue some of the worst decisions I made in my life have been the best. You know, so I'm like going, who am I to say what is good or bad? In the long run, it might turn out to being the making of that person is then, you know, recognises something that you'd never be able to describe without it.
Right. I'm going to stop us there. So thanks, Dave. Thank you so much for being brave enough to agree to do this, and for being so honest. It's fantastic. I want to say to the listener, there is no normal. There is no cliff in terms of God's love. That you're in a field that goes on forever, and God loves you everywhere in the field, no matter where you wander.
Amen.
And so quite often at the end of Justice Warriors, we read a poem or a Bible reading.
Yeah.
And I was thinking I might read my own poem. Is that right?
Dangerous game. Loving it.
So,
come on then.
If that's all right, I'm going to look it up, so you might hear a bit of typing. But I want to explain a little bit about what was in my mind so that you understand this poem. I was feeling very angry about the kind of God that I was taught about. This is not a poem about what I think God is like. This is a poem about what I think God is not like. So just to make that clear. But it expresses, maybe it's bad to end this podcast with me feeling angry, but this is me feeling angry about how I feel like I was taught what God is like. It's called Whitewashed. My God, the whitewashed tomb, hates you and will torture you for eternity, growing you new fingernails for everyone he rips out. My God, the marble statue demands purity, so even those who fit his awkward mould are miserable in its pressing grip. My God, the whitewashed tomb thinks like me, distastefully donning plastic gloves before handling this filthy world. My God, the whitewashed tomb loves me. He will pluck me from this goddamned place and put me in a jar to watch it burn. There will be no contaminants to dirty me. There will be no air in there. But I will not suffocate. My God will be sufficient for me. So the point of that is, even for the person who fits in to that weird view, it's actually suffocation and denial of it at the same time. So I hope we can find something better. I hope conversations like this might help us. So thank you again, Dave. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
And listener, we'll see you next time. You've been listening to Justice Warriors. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and you can also follow us on social media by searching for Justice Warriors, where warrior is spelt like someone who worries about things. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and leave us a rating, since that helps other people find us. Also, please tell your friends about us in real life. We'd love to hear from you. To get in touch, use the email address in the show notes or contact us via the social media links. Thanks for listening.
Now you do what they told you. Now you do what they told you.